Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now here's your host, Roxanne Derhaj.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne. Thanks for tuning in again this week. This week I have a colleague, Keka DasGupta. Hi Keka, how are you today?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
So Keka brings a lot of unique experience with her. And just recently, actually, just before I got on the line, I was able to jump on and check out her TED Talk, which really gave me some beautiful things to think about. So I'm going to read Keka's bio, and if there's anything that I miss, Keka, I invite you to kind of jump in at the end and share it with the audience.
Sure.
So she helps people do life on their own terms. She's the founder of a platform called The Art of Lifing, Lifing. She's the mom of two and has spent her working life as an award-winning PR marketing veteran and now as an entrepreneur to studying the emotional undercurrents that connect people to people and people to brands. She's worked with such globally recognized brands as IKEA, Nike, Disney, Johnson & Johnson, American Express, and many, many more Fortune 500s. She offers keynote speaking events, interactive workshops, online programming for corporations to create happy, healthy cultures, and anti-bullying programs to schools across North America, something that's so well needed, all using a gratitude-centered leadership. So, Keka, thanks again for coming on and spending time with my audience today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So is there anything that you didn't highlight in your bio that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Oh, no, I think that covered it very well. I'm excited to share this entire journey of lifing with you today. So,
okay, so tell us about that concept of lifing, so just like it's spelled, it's LIFE-ING.
Yes.
So tell me about that and kind of where that came from and kind of your path and what gets you here doing the things that you do daily and love.
Sure. Well, this started for me a few years ago. I was at an event where a gentleman named Philip McKernan was giving a talk downtown. And he's known to be somebody who sort of works with people to kind of bring out the best of who they are, So he talks about discovering you and becoming you. And so I was here in a room with like maybe 200 people, and he talked about a few things, and then he said, does anybody have any questions? And I sort of had this like, it's now or never moment. So I stood up and I said, Philip, I feel like I have lost who I am deep inside. So by all accounts, if anybody looked at me, they would say, well, she's got a really successful life. So I'm so grateful that I have an amazing husband. I've been married it'll be 22 years this May. I'm a mom of two boys. So I've got two boys who are 12 and 8. I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, I'm an entrepreneur, I have a successful marketing career, I have all of these things. But these are all roles that I play. And if somebody comes and says to me, well, Keka, who are you? Like, what are you all about? I have no words to describe that. And that feels like that shouldn't be the case. I should be fixing that. And interestingly, he responded, and I don't even fully remember everything that he said in that moment. I just remember standing up among that crowd and just feeling very lost, just not knowing who I was. And I thought, I can't believe I got to this place where I have had all the successes that you would imagine externally, but internally I felt like I was missing something. And I can't even tell you, Roxanne, how many people came to me afterwards, years later, when I would mention this, his presentation was called the Red Shoe Tour. And I said, that was my red shoe moment where I stood up. And I can't tell you how many people said, oh my gosh, I was there in the audience. I remember you asking that question. And it surprised me because I thought, how would how many conversations do we have on an everyday basis? How many times do people ask questions in a group setting? And I couldn't believe how many people remembered that. And over the years, what I started to discover is that I wasn't alone. That's a question that a lot of people ask. And that most times in society today, what we do is we focus on external factors or levels or certain milestones that we have to reach to define success. And that's what we think is a good life, that being successful equals having a good life. But the art of lifing, as I've sort of come to discover it, is creating life where you can grow, you can experience all those successes that you want, but that you do it while you're also thinking about how to keep yourself happy, how to nourish your soul, how to not just think about the external factors, but also to really think about what you want to do on your own terms. So when I look at my life today, one of my key values is family. That's a critical piece for me. And so I always talk about the fact that even though I have my own business, my kids have to be my number one client, because at the end of the day, every day that I'm leaving them at home and going out to a meeting or to business meetings or work, I'm taking time away from them, but I'm doing it to build our life together and their future and our time to make memories together. And so if I'm going to work for them, that's the compass I need to keep in my mind. So I'm now embarking on this journey called the Art of Lifing, and I use gratitude as a critical piece to help center myself back. And I teach corporations and I teach schools when it comes to anti-bullying how to use gratitude and how not to just practice it yourself, but share it and gift it with other people. But doing all of those things in order to build a life on your own terms. And by that I mean it's about success, but it's also about happiness, so that you can find yourself and live the life that you really want to live deep down inside.
I think you'd find that that concept, if you think of girlfriends when you get together, and at the stage and age that you're at, I remember having those conversations, looking around your dinner table with your girlfriends, or even I think men also experience it. But I think for us as women, and nothing against the men listening, but we often talk about those things. Like, I've done the university, I've done the career, I have had the children, I have had the marriage, maybe I'm into a second marriage or a separation. And it's kind of like, now what? And the traditional would say, is that not, let's use a term that we know, a midlife crisis, but really it's about hitting all those marks that are expected of us externally in the world, being quite successful at it by the sounds of things, and then thinking, okay, so now what?
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I'm as a marketer by trade. I've been a marketing and PR professional for 23 years before I sort of moved into this area. One of the key things that I think is that, we're living in an era where even if we don't recognize it, we have a bit of a self-worth crisis in some ways. So many of us, like, our human need is to feel like we belong, to feel like we matter, that we're contributing, that we're doing something where we're enough. But quite often when you look at marketing out there today, and I did this for 23 years, it is like we want, as a marketer, I need you as my customer to need me. And so if I need you to need me, then really essentially what I'm saying is you're not enough on your own. You need me to be enough. So you need this shampoo to make your hair shinier. You need this toothpaste to make your teeth whiter. If they're not whiter, then it's not enough. You need that car so that other people can admire you, because who you are on your own is not enough. And so I think that, we grow up being bombarded with these kinds of messages over and over again, and we start to believe that it's all of those external factors that are what need to give us the validation that we need. But at the end of the day, whether we matter or not, or whether we contribute or not, all comes from deep within us. And I think that quite often the midlife crisis is usually when people get to the point where they break off. They've had enough experience to go against the flow and say, hang on a second, I'm not living by those rules anymore. It's that point where they break free, but it is something that can happen at any time. And so the goal would be that if we use the art of lifing from the very beginning and say that we're going to live life on our own terms and define a really great great life, not just with success, but also with happiness, that can happen in your teens, your 20s, your 30s. You don't have to wait until your midlife crisis to be able to experience that you can live a much more fulfilling life. And, interestingly, if you look at the entrepreneurial world, there's so many founders who have built a company from the ground up, been incredibly successful, and are worshipped by people. They're put up high on pedestals, and everybody thinks this person has the dream life. And they are at the top, and they go, this is it? There's got to be more to life. And then you find that they move into their next transition where they do something that's way more meaningful for themselves. I've been following Arianna Huffington, where she started the Huffington Post. Now she does Thrive Global. She's a perfect example of somebody who's suddenly found a passion and a cause that's, more than just the news outlet that she created. And now she's doing something with more meaning. So many entrepreneurs do the same thing in their second or third rounds. They start to do things where they're putting happiness and impact and their personal gifts to the table. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to hack that system and not have to wait until you get to that midlife crisis point, but actually hack it from beforehand so that you can avoid all of the nonsense beforehand and really get to the heart of what's going to make your life really amazing.
Makes a lot of sense, because I often think of, like, in my coaching and my practice, that people will come with the same things, right? They'll say, I have done this, I've done that. And especially women, like, think about us and, at the positions that we are today as entrepreneurs or past executives, both of us.
Yes.
A generation or two, our moms weren't doing that. Like, they were in a different spot. If their kids were, well taken care of, well mannered, well dressed, well fed, all those things, that was, and, they were frontward facing and looking okay in the world, everything was good. Yeah. And now we are in such a special place to some degree that we can step back, like an Arianna Huffington or other women in the world, be it me or you, and say, okay, like, what imprint do I want to leave?
Yes.
Based on all the gifts that you have or I have, we can sit back and then really have these open conversations and actually create it, like, based on what you said when you asked that question, which oftentimes that must have been a proud moment for you to hear about it after. A lot of people are oftentimes too scared to get up and ask the question that's burning, even though they may have it, right? And then when you ask it, you realize, wow, there's a lot of people.
Yeah.
The same way, right?
Yeah. And, sometimes too, people are on that autopilot or that hamster wheel. They don't even realize it. And I think that's part of what we want to do, is get people to realize that, if you are in a life where you're just doing things, or you've fallen into a pattern and a routine every day, and you're like, why am I doing this? I don't even know why I'm doing this. It is time to ask those questions. And you're absolutely right that we are so lucky to be living in a time today where we not only have the freedom to be able to follow our path in many different ways. I think technology has enabled us to do that in many ways, but I also think our collective conscience has helped us. And I think that, this is the time for us to ask those questions. I got very lucky when I was working for an ad agency, DDB, and I still consult with them now. But once I had my older son, Caden, I just did not want to spend time away from my newborn baby. And the agency world is not a 9-to-5 job. It's amazing and tons of fun, and you learn so much, but it's just not a 9-to-5 type of job. And so when I went in, excuse me, I'm fighting this cold. When I went in and I was going to quit my job, and basically to say that I just really want to be with my son, and so I'm going to let this position go and go into a freelance world. The agency said, we don't want to lose you. Maybe you can work part-time. And I just sort of knew that I needed to really sort of separate things in order to have my freedom. The agency came back and said, okay, you know what? Would you consult for us? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I can do that. And it's just that our mindsets are different in the workforce today, that they allowed me to do that. And what that meant was I could be home with my kids. I could be feeding my son. I could give him a bath. Then I could go in for a meeting and I could come back and I could do work from home. It gave me so many freedoms in that way. And I think that we are in a world today where if we just ask the right questions, we can really take advantage of this era that we're in and live life fully to our own purpose.
So, and it's so interesting that you said that, because myself, the same thing. So I was a 17-and-a-half-year-old. And at the time, I got pregnant right when starting, wasn't
Right.
planned. And I'm like, oh my goodness, now what am I going to do? Right. And then I thought, okay, so now within a year, I was pregnant of starting with the consulting firm. And then it was like, well, I'm in Niagara, they're in Toronto. It's different when you're on your own, those types of things. And then I had a decision to make because I thought, I can't come home at 7 o'clock at night when my baby's, I've missed a full day.
Yeah.
Kind of beside myself. So
Yeah.
I went to them and said that I love my job. I love consulting with, all the companies that I did with health and wellness strategy and mental health and wellness. But I would have to, quit. And at that point, they said, you know what? We'll work something out. And I
Yeah.
went, okay, well, and that was just when consultants were going virtual. It's where you could
Right.
work kind of, basically you'd have a setup. And I was fortunate, I was one of the first ones. There was an amalgamation and the new culture coming in and had already had a bit of that. And lucky, I was able to keep the job that I loved, but also like you, be able to, stay at home. When my little guy came through the door, he can come up to me,
Yeah.
and even if I was on the phone, ask me for a cookie, because if I was listening to, being on a call that I was running, I could be available.
Yeah.
So again, a world where for a lot of, and I think men are equally as able to now, and women, that we can still enjoy, the things that we want to do. That
Yes.
said, the women that are listening that are at home, or are in traditional roles or have jobs, I want them to know that what I hear you clearly saying is find out what you love. And it doesn't mean that you have to be an entrepreneur, just make that imprint in some way.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've been lucky enough in my career too. I've spent the first part of my career, the first 7 years working at IKEA Canada. And I was in their PR department in their head office, and we did some amazing things. And, throughout my career, I've always made a promise to myself that I want to get up in the morning and go to work, feeling excited, like wanting to go into work and wanting to do something that's really impactful. And so I feel like, even in traditional jobs today, it's so important to take the initiative to follow your heart and do the things you want to do, even within our organizations. I think the opportunity to be an intrapreneur within corporate companies is huge right now, because I think companies are looking for that disruption. I think for many different companies, they appreciate you navigating your own career. And so if something's not working for you right now, they appreciate you going up and asking them and talking about things and exploring and looking for other opportunities. And so I always encourage people to look for that, and when it comes to the corporate workshops I do, I work with middle managers and top leaders, and I say to them, how comfortable are your employees to come and talk to you about things? And, today I really do believe that work and life, there isn't a work-life balance. It's really work-life integration, because, we're working for people's mind share so often today. In most jobs, even a cashier at the front end of a store can look at how products are being packed and might be able to say, hey, you know what, if we just turn this upside down, you could actually put double the product in half the space, for example, So looking for those opportunities, I think that I always point that out to managers, is that how well do you know your employees? How happy are they in their lives and in their work together? Because if you can make sure that both of those areas are happy, you're going to get the best product. You're going to get the best employee performing at that optimum level. And so it's not just about what happens in the walls of work and then you leave it and you go home anymore. It is really about looking at the whole puzzle all together and not just a few pieces in
And
isolation.
health and wellness, years ago, when I started in it, say 20, 25 years ago, it was kind of definite.
Yes, it
You
was.
parked your, you parked your family, you went to your job, you did your job, you parked your job, and you went back home. And we recognize that, a happy employee, and ultimately, where does the employee spend more time? They spend more time during the day with now in the traditional environments doing a job. So, but their family takes up a lot more, life takes up a lot more time. So if they can figure out kind of what they value, what are my top values, right? And you clearly said family was one of them.
Yes.
And when people get connected with, if I was completely successful today with what in my life, how would my top 3 values be the most, they would be frontward facing, and there would be no negotiation. But going back to that talk that you said that a lot of people have with themselves is, I think when the incongruence happens where they've maintained the success, they're at the top of the hill of wherever they wanted to be, and they're looking around, they're thinking, wow, my value, I think I may have skipped a couple of values here on the way up, or not brought it up with me. And that's where I see people making a lot of shifts.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now with it, you talked a little bit about your school program and your corporate program. So, I often think, and I wonder what you think about this, Keka, that sometimes we gain wisdom as we get older.
Mm-hmm.
And I often say we need to take the wisdom of the old and we need to flip it to the young.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
with your school program, tell me a little bit about, how you approach the concept of, I mean, at the end of the day, it's bullying is being nice, trying to be nice, right? If we could kind of cut away the language, what kind of things, how do you approach when you go into schools to kind of assist with situations, which unfortunately there's too many of them today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that there's a couple of key things in my program that are different than other traditional programs, and I think there's a need for both. But excuse me. What I look at in our school programs and what I do when I go in is I help students recognize the power of gratitude first and foremost. Because when you share gratitude with somebody, you're validating them to the deepest part of who they are. So it's something that, in our social culture, we often don't share. So, we'll wait until someone leaves the room and then we tell the rest of the people in the room, oh, isn't he great? I just love him. Isn't he fantastic? Or sometimes we're deeply grateful for just a word or a sense or something that somebody has done in a moment. We never tell them. And that person also has no idea that they've ever left that imprint on you. So what I do is I help people understand that. So I share with students that when you actually go and you share gratitude with somebody, you watch their reaction and you see the kind of takeaway that you get from them. It's an energy booster. It's like a happiness boomerang that comes back to you, So you can, when you have a negative environment of bullying, if you add positivity into it, you can change the temperature and the climate of a school environment. It also starts with empathy. And part of this, I take some lessons from drama and theater, my background in theater. I used to be part of a special music theater program in high school. And so often, in theater, we talk about really delving into the character, the person that you're speaking to. What I do with students is I say to them, how can we look for and really understand what other people are going through, even if they're not actually saying something to us? So there's a few different exercises that I use, and there's one video, for example, that went viral a few years ago. There was a student in an art school in Chicago that did this particular experiment around beautiful things. So she went around to her high school and was taping individual people and videotaping them, and then they would say, what is this for? She would say, oh, I'm taping things that I find beautiful. And the reactions of the people, the students, was so, first of all, so varied, and also so telling. Some of them they would be gushing. Others would just have a huge smile on their face and be like, oh my gosh, you just made my day. And then other students at the same time would get angry and be like, shut up, and we start to explore why those reactions happen. So someone's really happy or someone's really blushing, that comes from a certain mindset or a certain perspective. The student who might just turn around and say, shut up, what might that reaction be coming from? Where might that pain be? So we explore that. And for example, we talk about if that person has come back to you and said, shut up because you said they're beautiful, chances are they've convinced themselves at such a deep level that they are not beautiful, that even if somebody tells them that, they can't accept it. And chances are that they've been so hurt in some ways that not only can they not accept it, but they're immediately going to fight back to say, like, you're just making fun of me and I won't put up with it. Like, they're hugely defensive. Bullying behavior often comes from a place of hurt. When somebody's hurt, they try to pay that hurt forward in order to alleviate what they're feeling. And that doesn't work. It actually never solves the problem. But what often happens is, I'm hurt. I want to take my hurt and get rid of it. I don't know how to do it, so I just try to pass it on to somebody else. I pay that forward. And then in our systems, in our social structure, we start to vilify that person. And so then that becomes, you're the bully, I'm the victim, and we get very polarized in that sort of way. If we can start, however, as students, and I think that students are, young people are incredibly intuitive and incredibly empathetic, and I think as adults we don't give them enough credit. If students from the very beginning in their classrooms can say, okay, we're going to make a classroom creed where we say that nobody's going to sit alone from our classroom, which might mean that if anybody in the lunch cafeteria is sitting and you see them alone, the culture that you're cultivating and fostering is, we're not going to let anybody sit alone, then we're going to bring them over. Then what you're naturally doing is including people from the very beginning so that the people that might typically be isolated or feel like they're really hurt now start to become part of the conversation. That those isolations don't go so far apart, which is often where bullying behavior starts and gets deeper and more harmful. And so what I talk about in the school programming is something I call quiet leadership, because, we tend in our society to really celebrate extroverts. We think that if you're a leader, you're up on stage, you're talking to everybody, you're the popular girl, you're the it girl, that sort of thing. But leadership can be incredibly powerful, even when it's a whisper from one person to another person. Even if it's a quiet nod from somebody saying, I believe in you, you got this. That type of leadership is something that I think we need to celebrate much more. And so that's what I call quiet leadership. So whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, it doesn't matter. What we're asking students to do in these workshops is start to recognize that, first of all, I do have the power to empathize and I can understand where other people are coming from. They don't have to come to me to ask me or tell me. I can proactively monitor my environment and see what those signs are. Number two, I have the power in myself to make a difference in somebody else's life. If you believe that, then when you start to apply it, it can be hugely powerful. So to say that, what, all I need to do is make somebody feel like they're going to feel included. All I need to do is listen to somebody to make them feel like they've been heard. Any of those small little actions can make a big difference. And when you use gratitude in the process of doing that, it just adds that extra positive currency into the mix. And it gives people the experience of somebody getting something great from you. And I'll give you an example. If you've ever given money to a homeless person or donated or volunteered at a soup kitchen or something like that, chances are when you left that experience, you left on a high. Anytime I've gone out and done anything for the community, it doesn't matter the actual thing that I did to help somebody, I leave feeling really, really great for the rest of the day. When you share gratitude, that's what happens. You give somebody else their deepest validation and you make them happy, but you also leave really happy. And happiness is something that's contagious, like in a good way. So if you can bring that into the school mix and help students recognize that they are leaders in their own right. We are all imperfectly perfect, and that we just have to recognize that we are enough and we have the power to make a difference in our school. As soon as you can help students understand that, those light bulb moments that go off are so powerful. And it's the kind of thing that then completely can transform a social environment, because now students don't feel like they have to just go to the authority, they just have to report, but they can actually proactively make a positive difference in someone's life.
How lovely. And you're by the way, your smile is beautiful. If I could just imagine what you would do into a classroom when you go in and you train these students, because, even though we think we destratify, the teachers from the students, it's still the authority, which I understand there's a place for that. Right. But even, just listening to you, because I work, obviously through my career, I've worked with students, or young people, I should say, and oftentimes the bully, and you can, tell me your perspective on this, has come from the less than ideal situation at home, where, so we're talking about context. You're talking about a positive context, yes. Right? Which, the ones that are having good homes, they get cross-pollinated. They get a good environment at home because, and then they come to school and they bring that good environment. You get children where literally they're hanging on by their fingernails to what you're talking about, which is somebody thought I was great today. Somebody thought I was worthy enough to give me a smile. Somebody was worthy enough to have a conversation with me and say, hey, Roxanne, how are you doing? Truly, how are you doing today? And, what happens, and you'll hear the experts say, well, you put the child back into the environment, how are you being helpful? But unfortunately, if this is all they have, just if you can make this as fulfilling and gratifying,
Yes.
or nourishing for them, at least you give them something to have a context to think, I can still feel good on the inside, even though I go home and maybe there's some stuff at home that's less than desirable.
Yes.
We kind of get a benchmark, which I often say that we all have an internal GPS, that we're all meant to be happy, but as we go along life, it kind of plucks away at it.
Yes,
And if
absolutely. And,
it's already been in it, they're
yes.
already start to second guess the world and how good the world is and all those things.
Yes, absolutely. And for anybody, different social settings can give you different social experiences. And if you can't, young people might not be able to control what's happening at home or what's happening with the adults in their lives, or they might not be able to control a certain particular part of their life. But if they can have a positive experience in a different part of their life, it gives them a different frame of reference to look at when they're evaluating everything overall. It doesn't mean that everything all has to look one way on its own. And I think that's important. And I think the other thing too is that this empowers students to recognize just how much of a positive impact they can have on somebody. And at the end of the day, it doesn't cost anything. It's time and intention. That's it. And so I think that, when people experience the impact of bringing positivity into somebody's life, it's almost intoxicating, but in a really good way, because then it's like you want to do more of that. It gives you such a good feeling, that sense of purpose, and being able to change somebody's life for the better can be so powerful that it enables you to say, okay, I'm going to do more of this. I'm going to look at this more. And at the end of the day, leadership is all about that, right? When we hire people into management positions and leadership positions in corporations, we want them to be able to understand the psyche of the team that they're leading and bring them to that place where they're going to perform at their best. So at the end of the day, if school is supposed to help build our foundation for work at the end of the day, then these types of lessons are really going to leave us a huge impact for how they'll perform as they grow up as well.
And going back to that issue of wisdom, if you take the old, I often say I'm Trinidadian.
Yes.
And, when we would, get on our little scuffles, my grandparents would put my sister and I with my grandma, who'd be able to mediate in such a warm, kind way, because she was the grandparent and very, we would listen and we loved her and she was wise.
Yes.
And, you kind of think about where you're talking about leadership, right? Like all your little ones in school,
yeah,
right? They're learning things about how to care for themselves and stay connected. So if they can lead themselves, when they kind of show up in jobs as middle managers or leaders or senior leadership, I often say, there's no need to throw sand in each other's eyes on the corporate table.
Yes.
Literally, there's different ways around it. And it really, it's so important, teaching kids day in, day out, kind of what's important. What is it to be kind and gentle? What is it to, if you see someone really, really sad, like your friend, like your little friend that's in your TED talk with the goldfish,
Yes.
that gave you that meant something so big that you remembered that today.
Yes,
right?
100%.
So to be able to give that experience, I think, is very, very important.
Yes. And the biggest lesson there is, I think, that people underestimate. They just assume people know. And they don't. At the end of the day, it's so important that what seems obvious to us in terms of the impact that someone has had on us, it's not necessarily obvious to them. And each of us are leaving really powerful, positive imprints on other people around us all the time. And we're walking away and we have no idea that we've done that. And then we might be hard on ourselves at the end of the day. But the thing is that if we actually then proactively go and tell the people around us who've had that impact, then they'll know. And it's the ultimate way to thank somebody.
What's screaming at me when I listen to you, I think of legacy. Like, what is it, when you Keka talked in her TED talk, which it was beautiful. I would suggest you go on and listen to it. And she wrote her mom she wrote a letter, which was basically like a living eulogy.
Yes.
And just think of the impact of, you know, what that did for her mother, that understood the gifts that she gave her when she was alive versus when, if she had passed away, that would have been read, which I'm sure a lot of people would get that with your mom, but for her to hear it and to be able to really, really relish in it and be as ecstatic as you talked about her being, what a gift. I love that concept, you know, because you're saying to people, it doesn't have to be a big thing that they do for you, but even the little kind things, like, you know, if your mother kind of, you know, makes your favorite meal when you go over, or you know, you know, helps you with a child that's sick. All those things are very, very important, that you let the people in your life around you, be it a parent, it could be a coworker, it could be a friend, it could be a partner, a child. I often say to my son, you know, the things that he does for me, I'm always grateful, and I thank him all the time. I'll go, oh, thanks, Bob.
Yes.
No, I'm thanking him, because oftentimes kids will think that they should thank their parents, but it should be both ways.
It should be both ways. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting, you know, my after my father passed away, our temple community was really so supportive and really around us, and they really sort of put their arms around our family and took care of us in a time when we were feeling very raw. And my mom actually came to our temple priest only recently, well, I would say about 6 months ago, at our temple, and said, you know, I've never said this to you, but the way that you led our community and took care of us during that like really difficult time is something that I will never forget. And I know that, you know, we don't always say this, and I wanted you to know that it means a tremendous amount to me. And he was really incredibly touched. And I mean, I was very proud of my mom for taking that step and doing that. And she said, you know, well, I learned it from you, which we had a good laugh. But it was one of those things where, you know, we often just assume, so here's a priest who does all sorts of things for their communities. He's somebody that we would just expect would know that we're grateful. But when she actually uttered those words and said it, if you could see his expression on his face, it was so meaningful. And I think that's the kind of thing, you know, that we just don't want to take things for granted, right? And so the idea to be able to thank somebody in the moment, to validate them, is just a powerful thing. And you're right, it doesn't matter how young or old you are. It can be at any age. I think that impact is really huge.
Well, Keka, I knew this was going to intuitively be an amazing interview. Thank you so much. I have learned a lot, you know, from just listening to you, and just that whole element of saying it when you feel it.
Yes.
When you have good things and you're receiving, be it small or big, just to continue to share that. Now, I'm sure everybody listening is wanting to get to you in some way. So tell them where they can get a hold of you, or where they can kind of check you out on YouTube.
Sure, yeah. So I have a YouTube channel that I just recently launched called The Art of Lifing with Keka. So as you noted at the beginning of the podcast, it's Lifing, LIFE-ING. So if you put in The Art of Lifing with Keka, it'll show up, Keka. I put out videos every week, and it's very much about my own journey and the journey that I want to share with the audience as we go. But the idea is all about doing life on purpose and on your own terms. And I cover all kinds of topics, from the art of lifing at work, the art of lifing with parenting, and just art of lifing in general. So I would love it if people check that out, shared, subscribed, and just give me feedback. I'm always looking for feedback. So I'd appreciate that a lot.
Awesome. Well, a couple of things that I've learned, and you know, I always talk about staying connected to yourself or being authentic. But again, this is just another example of that. When you feel it and you experience it, share it. And, you know, I guess the challenge that I would have for you today, based on Keka's TED Talk, which I think you should go check out, is there someone in your life that you could write a living eulogy to? And it's, you know, even if it's a small little note with a couple of things that they've done for you, and put it in the mail, put a stamp on it, and just send it to them, and then see the reaction that you get back. The more we're letting people know what we're experiencing of them, we're giving back to the world, and then we're just making things a lot nicer with all the things that we deal with day to day. So again, thanks again to Keka for being with us. And for anyone wanting more information on me, I do keynotes and workshops and training. You can reach me at roxannederhodge.com. So take care, everyone, and we'll chat again with you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.